I got to tell you, last week, we had a message on the invitation that God extends to every person walking the planet, the invitation to step into a saving relationship with Him. And next week, we're going to get super practical. And so I just want to tell you right now, mark it down on your calendars, whatever's going on, cancel it, because you got to be here next week for the message. But tonight, we're going to do something crazy. Are you ready? Don't walk out when I say this, okay? So I'm going to speak on the Bible. I just want to be clear. Tonight, we are going to talk about wine and fasting. Not sure how to respond, huh? Somebody here just goes, babe, we're going to come back to this place. Wine and intermittent fasting, I'm in. That's what I'm talking about. Now, when I say fasting, I'll get to the wine in a second. I'm not talking about intermittent fasting, though I'm just curious. Does anybody do that? Anybody? Yeah, I'm an intermittent faster. Just recently, the last couple weeks, I'm the 16-8, which basically means I don't eat for 16 hours and I starve. And then at some point around 12:30, I get to eat. Nothing to do with our message. I just want to pass it on to you because someone may be wondering, man, what do you do? That's what I do, intermittent fasting. It's really tough. I'm not sure I recommend it. But that's not the fasting we're talking about. And wine deserves its own introduction. All right, let's talk about this for a second to set us up for where we are going to go. Now, wine in the Bible was actually, and this may surprise you, it was the preferred drink of choice by most. Okay, now that may be news to some of you if you're not maybe new to church or maybe just had a chance to really dig into the Bible, but wine was actually the preferred drink of choice, and here's why. Because water was actually very scarce and also very dangerous. If you're familiar with third world countries that struggle to find clean water, you know how dangerous it can be if you've ever looked into that. And if you haven't, you should, just to become aware of what's happening around the world. So clean water is necessary, and when you don't have clean water, it is very dangerous. And so in biblical times, wine was the drink of choice, not necessarily for the effect, but more so for the safety. When wine was created, it would be grapes that were smashed and juice would come out, and the juice would be fermented and it would equal wine. And so it is the wine that we think about, wine that you may enjoy on your own. Don't say anything here, it's cool. But wine was the preferred drink of choice in the Bible. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Fasting, on the other hand, was something that was way more common in biblical times than it would be today. Fasting was something that you would do for a couple different reasons. Some might do it just out of tradition or out of habit. We'll hit on that in a moment. But most people would do it as an opportunity to lean into God, to take something out of your life, even just for a few hours, so that you might lean into independence on God or also draw closer to Him. It was used to help build a strength of dependence, that when something's missing in my life, I know that God as always can fill that need. It was used for direction. People would fast so that they could lock in on what God might be leading them to do in life or leading them to do in a decision that they may be making. So wine and fasting were two very common, very prevalent things in the culture of the Bible. And so with that, Jesus is going to tell a couple more stories. We've been on a story journey here over the last few weeks, and we're going to look at a few more that involve wine and fasting. You excited? You ready? We're in, so let's do it. All right, so let's look at verse number 1. We're going to be in Luke 5 today. And to set this up, what you need to know is that Jesus has just recently drawn in a new, we're going to say potential disciple. He will become a disciple in a moment or a little bit later, but he's drawn in this new person, and his name is Levi. Now, Levi later on will be known as Matthew, okay? So just a little tidbit there. You don't need that for tonight, but just so you know. So Levi's now come into the picture. Jesus walked up to him while he was working in his tax collector role. Remember the tax collectors? They were very much hated because they stole money from people. No one liked them. And Jesus walks up to this tax collector and says, "Follow me," and for whatever reason he says, "Okay." And so Jesus and Levi and all of Jesus' current disciples head to Levi's house, and they hang out and they start to have a celebration, which involves eating food and drinking wine. There we go. Now we're tracking, all right? So they're having a celebration. Now, one other little note I want to make so that this can make sense. In biblical times, Homes that were a little bit larger than normal would have a porch, probably something like you're familiar with in your home. But the difference was the way the towns were designed is when a porch was present, when a rabbi, a teacher, which Jesus was, would come into a home, typically after the meal or maybe even during the meal, they might move that gathering out to the porch. And people from around the town, because the homes were so close, would sometimes come around the porch so they could lean in and listen to what the teacher or the rabbi might say. Remember, rabbis were typically just passing through. So in this crowd of people looking in on what Jesus might have to say as his attention is growing, we also see a group of religious teachers, the Pharisees, which we keep running into pretty much every story. And they're there not to support, they're there to watch. They want to see what Jesus is going to say. What's he going to do this time? What's he going to mess up? And they're on guard. And so that's kind of the scene we are in. So let's look at this. Jesus is going to share a couple of different stories to give us an important lesson, and we'll bring this all home in the end. Here's how it starts. And they said to him, these are the Pharisees, the disciples of John fast often and offer prayers, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink. So the religious leaders are there, and they're going, look, man, this John guy, if you're not familiar with John, he comes into the New Testament. John was also known as John the Baptist. This was the cousin of Jesus. He was the front runner for Jesus. So he kind of paved the way for Jesus' ministry, and then Jesus came on the scene and kind of took over. Now, John, if you're familiar at all with the Bible, he was a little extreme, all right? You think intermittent fasting is bad? Some of you judged me when I said that. This guy ate honey and wild locusts, that's it. And he fasted 2 days a week. So their reference here is that, hey, there was this guy, John, that was your cousin, by the way, Jesus, and he did things just a little bit different than you do, not to mention the Pharisees, us, we tend to fast and pray. So what's up with this? Why don't your disciples do this too? So it goes on. Verse 34. Jesus is going to respond with a story as he often does, because he's a great storyteller. Can you make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. So Jesus uses a story about a wedding. Now, a couple things. First, he says bridegroom. In case that's confusing for you, that's just the groom of the bride. We don't use that terminology, so just to make sure you understand that. Now, the wedding feast here, I don't know about you, but I've been to quite a few weddings. Many different capacities I've been, whether officiating or maybe doing some photography or videography for a wedding or just attending as a guest. I've seen a lot of different weddings. But one thing seems to be always the same. There is typically food and a celebration at a wedding. Now, there's a few exceptions, maybe if you elope or something like that. But typically there's food, drink, and a celebration, right? Why? Because a wedding is a celebration, unless your kid's marrying someone that you don't like, and that's a different story and a different sermon for another day. But typically, it's a celebration, right? And so what would happen in this time is you would never come to, though fasting was prevalent, you would not go to a wedding and fast. You go to a wedding to celebrate. And so Jesus uses this story to kind of shake up the tension a little bit. And he says, when you go to a wedding, you don't fast. And when you're with the bridegroom, you don't fast until the bridegroom is gone or until the wedding is over. And then they will fast in those days. What he says is, throughout the New Testament, Jesus was referenced, all right, if you remember this, Jesus was referenced as the groom and the bride is the church, okay? So this was symbolism that was used throughout the New Testament. And Jesus is saying, hey, they don't need to fast right now. Why? Remember the reason for fasting? It was to seek God. They don't need to fast. They don't need to seek God because God is sitting right here with them. Jesus is God. Therefore, Jesus is sitting right here. I'm sitting right here, guys. So they don't need to fast because I am sitting with them and enjoying this celebration with them. So he uses this story to kind of turn their question on their head. But then Jesus, as he always does, goes, you know what? I'm not done yet. There's a bigger issue here that I want to get into. And this is the issue we're going to talk about tonight. Look at verse 36. There you go. Here's what he says. A parable, an example. Listen to this. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. That's a simple illustration. He says, hey, if you have a new shirt and an old shirt that has a hole, if you rip something off the new shirt to put onto the old shirt, both shirts are ultimately ruined. The new shirt now has a hole, which it didn't have before, and the old shirt, likely, the material doesn't match. So this was an easy illustration they would understand. By the way, a side note worth noting, clothes were extremely rare and expensive in biblical times. Okay, they didn't have a 3 for $9.99 like you see at the souvenir shops where you can just order whatever you want on Amazon, right? We don't know how it's made or what's it made of, but you can buy a shirt. It wasn't like that. It was very difficult to get clothing. Typically, it was made for yourself. So this was actually something that would be wrestled with, because if you had a garment that had a hole, you would want to try to fix it because so much of your investment was into that clothes. But Jesus explained what they would have known culturally. You don't do this because you ruin both garments. But he's not done. He goes on to the next one. He says, and no one, here comes the wine. Some of you are waiting. Where is it at? And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins and it will be spilled. And the skins will be destroyed. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about how wine was made. You ready for this educational lesson? All right. When wine, okay, so first, it starts with the grapes. You break the grape. By the way, do you know how they do this? They step on it. Did you know that? Some of you need to stop drinking wine tonight. That wine was made because someone used their bare feet and stepped on it. I'm just telling you, that bothers me. It should bother you. So wine would be, the grapes would be pressed. The juice would come out. Then the juice would be put into something called a wineskin. Do you know what a wineskin is? I thought I'd show you. How about that? You want to see one? Okay, now I'm going to be honest with you. This isn't exactly a real one, because when I looked it up, they were extremely expensive. So I went with the Amazon version. But this is something that would semi-replicate what a wineskin looks like, okay? And don't worry, it's empty. I drank it all before I got here, okay? So that was a joke. Some of you are like, darn, this church is crazy. Okay, don't worry. So the wineskin was made of an animal skin, typically goat skin. And what it would do is they would fill this up with that grape juice. And over the course of about 7 days, that grape juice would ferment. And when it would ferment, what would happen is gas would release from the grape juice. And that's what would expand. And so you put wine into a new wineskin or a new goat skin device so that as the wine expanded, the goat skin would expand as well. By the way, if you were to go home tonight and try to make wine, just know, even if you put it in a glass jar, in 7 days, the gas will expand, and that glass jar will bust all over your house. So don't do that. Be careful. This is a real thing. Now, what Jesus is referencing here is that what you would never do is take new wine and put it into an old wineskin that had already been expanded. Why? Because the new wine would continue to expand, and that skin would not be able to handle it, and it would burst, and you would lose the wine, it would lose the value. This was the illustration Jesus was making. Now, for us, we need a little explanation because we don't necessarily deal with wineskins. And if you knew what this was when I pulled it out, enough said, right? You get it? It's Thursday night. I thought we were relaxing. Y'all seem tense. Someone's been tense since I said wine at the beginning of the message, all right? Come on. This is the Bible, all right? We're just talking about that. Okay, I'm going to put this away so y'all aren't dreaming about what's in there. Brother, I did not drink any wine before I got here, okay? Just chill. Now, what is Jesus trying to say? This is the big question. What is he doing? What point is he trying to make? This point is not only significant for the people in the audience that day, but it is very significant for you and I today. Because even if some of us in this room are Christ followers, this is something that we still sometimes get wrong. I'm titling this message, I don't normally tell you what I'm going to title a message, but I'm titling this message, Hit the Reset. Because I believe what Jesus is articulating in this point is going to be very significant for each of us to consider over our lives. That there is an area that we might need to hit the reset and to realign with how God intended for this to be. So what was the point he was making with the patch of cloth and the wineskin? What Jesus was saying is that your old way, Pharisees, religious teachers, your old way, your religion that you are pushing does not mix with this new message that I am bringing to the table. You have an old way, and I am bringing a new way. Now, it's important to note, Jesus did not say that the old way was bad. He just said that I'm coming to bring something new. What was the old way? The old way was you do things, you follow the law, you follow the rules, and that's how you get to God. Jesus came onto the scene, and he said, you step into relationship with me, and I will move you into action. I will move you into doing the things God's called you to do. Jesus brought a new way of looking at what we might call religion. Jesus wanted to abolish religion and bring to the scene relationship. Now, why is this important? Because today, many people still struggle with this thought, this idea. We think that there are a bunch of things we have to do to be right with God. And Jesus says, no, I want to invade your life. I want to change you. That's the invitation. And as I invade your life and as I begin to change you, you will naturally move into the ways that God has called you to. Now, in case you're still struggling, the best way I can and by the way, this can be a little complicated, so track with this here. One of the best ways I can wrap my mind around this is buying a resale home. Any realtors in the house? I learned resale is a key word. That means it was an old house that someone's buying, it becomes new. When we moved to Missouri City, my wife and I, my family, we had to buy a new home. We got to buy a new home. We were excited about it. We moved into Missouri City. We found an amazing home. It's actually an incredible story that I'll tell you on another day when we have more time. But we found this home, and we said, man, this is it. We purchased it. And as we began to move in, here's the thing. The family that was moving out, to them, that home was old. But to us, as we were moving in, it was what? It was new. The house was the same, right? The structure didn't change. The color didn't change until I got a paint can, right? It was the same. But to them, it was old. To us, it was new. Why? Because what happened? When we moved in, all of a sudden, we started doing work on the inside. We started bringing in furniture. We started painting some walls. We kicked down some walls. I didn't actually get to. I wanted to so bad. Just kick down a wall and open up a new room. We started doing all of these different things. And all of a sudden, this house where the structure was the same became new. And over time, as we worked from the inside out, all of a sudden that structure changed not only on the inside, but also on the outside. That all of a sudden the neighbors started noticing, hey, something's different over there. Why? Because someone has moved in. To the old family, or the previous family, it was an old structure. But when we came in, it became new. And this is how it works when Jesus invades your life. He comes into you, the same bone structure, and he makes you new. As he begins to work on the inside, as he begins to change your heart, as he begins to draw you close to him, all of a sudden, things begin to change. There's a great scripture in 2 Corinthians 5:17. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he or she is a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the what? The new has come. The new has come. Do you see this? Man, when Jesus invades a life, he makes changes. But the key is that you and I, there is nothing we can do to get right with God. It's simply the accepting, like we talked about last week, of the invitation. And then once Jesus comes in, he begins to do the work. Now, an interesting thing comes up. Does this mean that I don't have to worry about how I live my life? I mean, if I'm saved, right? You said I'm saved, I'm going to go to heaven. I got all these things, so I'm right with God. Like, we're good. See you at the end of life. I'm going to go over here and do my thing. What do you think? Well, think of it like this. When Jesus came in, he didn't fit the culture. He didn't fit with the religious teachers. He didn't fit with the sinners. When Jesus came in, he was different. Why? Because God was moving his life. He was God. For you and I, over time, as God begins to work in our life, we won't fit in culture either, or we shouldn't, because God is beginning to change us. So will we look different? You bet. Do we have permission to just do whatever we want? Well, no. See, God desires for you and I to draw close to him. And as we draw close to him, we begin to follow him. And as we follow him, and as we stay close to him, we begin to change. And people sometimes struggle with this. Why did God bring all these rules? Like, it feels like the Bible has all of these things that I can't do. Maybe you've had that same thought. Well, think of it like this. God's rules were made for us, to help us, oftentimes to protect us. Think of it like this. Parents don't have kids because they have a playroom full of toys and they want to have kids so that there's someone to play with the toys. No, they have, well, I mean, maybe that's possible. Okay, let's just assume the average person doesn't do that. Okay, if you do have that, I'd like to talk to you and understand why, so that I don't mess that up again. But for most of us, we have kids, and then we realize, my goodness, they need to be entertained, and it ain't going to be by me. Go buy all the toys, or call grandma, let grandma buy the toys. And so you make a room with kids or with toys and all that, so that they have a place to play. Right? The toys were brought in because the kids were there. With God's rule, it's the same thing. That God didn't have a bunch of rules and then say, I'm going to make people and put them under my rule. No, he said, as I bring people into this world, I realize that I want to help them. I want them to help navigate this life. So I'm going to bring some things in that are going to help them, that are going to often protect them, that are going to lead them into a better way. So it's not freedom to live how we wish, but we don't have to worry as much about what we do, because when we walk with God, he begins to change us from the inside first, that then spills to the outside. God's great. Listen, this is so important. Our world is struggling a little bit today. And I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about the Christian world. We're struggling a little bit because we have forgotten who Jesus is. We've become very judgmental as a group of Christ followers. We look at people that do things different from how God says to do something, and we immediately begin to judge. We immediately begin to separate. And yet, if you go back and read the Bible, just think about the stories we've covered over the last few weeks. What was Jesus doing? He was hanging out with sinners, tax collectors, other scriptures with prostitutes. He was always meeting the people that were away from God to bring them in. And his constant critique from everybody else was what? You spend so much time with the sinners. What about the religious people? And Jesus is saying, this is why I came. I came for everyone on this planet that is away from God so that they could be reunited with God. And so we've gotten a place where, now I don't want to get a little too preachy here, but we've come to a place where we get really judgmental and we miss that the grace of God is what needs to be extended. Yes, you do have some things as Christ followers. If you're not a Christ follower, this isn't for you yet. But if you're a Christ follower, yes, there are some things God desires for you and I to do, to follow in his footsteps, to live differently, to live counterculturally. But as we walk with God and get closer to him, we cannot allow it to move us away from this desperate world that needs God just as much as you did before you found him. We're a part of that mission. And so this judgment can take over. This looking at people differently can take over. And this isn't the grace of God. Now, are we going to always get this right? No. You and I are going to mess up. So relax a little bit. You're going to mess up. Some of you already messed up, so have I. We know it. We're going to mess up. This is the grace of God. The difference is this. You ready? Maybe this will be helpful. The Christ follower chases after God. And on the journey of chasing after God, we will fall into, we'll use the word, the church word here, sin. We will fall into things that we know we shouldn't do. Mistakes are made, things are said. As we're pursuing God, we're going to fall in because none of us are perfect. The believer, though, the Christ follower, realizes, hey, I have fallen into sin. I hop right back up. I turn around. I keep going toward God as I move away from whatever that thing was. That's the life of the Christ follower. It's not a perfect, blameless life. It's a life chasing after Jesus and doing our best to become more and more like him. The person that's not following Christ typically is just chasing after sin. That's the difference between the two. And God desires for every person. You remember last week it said that he is slow and patient, desiring that everyone would receive this invitation in the new life that is found in him. So what Jesus did with the wineskins and the patch is he came in and he said, listen, your old way is not a match. It doesn't mix with the new way. Now, what about today for you and I that are Christ followers in the room? Do we still get this wrong? I'm going to argue yes. I'm going to argue that you might not even realize that you're still bringing religion over a relationship into your life. You ready? Okay, I don't want to step on any toes. It's going to be helpful. Here's an example. You ready? We go to church because it's Sunday. Religion or relationship? Religion. Relationship says, I go to church because I want to worship God. It just happens to be on Sunday. Do you see how easy it is to get this mixed up? Oh no, it's Sunday, we're going to church. We're going to church, and if we're not careful, it becomes religion. Now, I don't want you to stop going to church on Sunday or Thursday. That's not what I'm saying, by the way. All right, don't. But the idea is why? No, I want to go because I want to worship God. Let's think about some more. I pray before dinner because mom and dad tell me, and that's what I'm supposed to do. Religion or relationship? Religion. I pray before dinner for many reasons, but mainly because I'm thankful for tonight. We'll use the example that I have clean water that I can drink at dinner and I don't have to worry about getting sick. Man, I'm so thankful that God is so good to me, even though life may not be perfect all around me, but that's a good thing. I pray because I'm thankful. Relationship. I read my maybe verse of the day or whatever it is you might have heard of that you do, because the pastors always tell us to read our Bibles, read along with us. Religion or relationship? Religion. No, you know what? I may not do it every day. I may not do it for very long, but I desire to draw closer to God a little bit more. I want to develop my devotion to him. And so I spend some time getting to know him by reading his word or listening to some music so that I could get to know him like I would a friend. That's the relationship. We could go on and on. Do you see the point? So even today, even for those of us in here that are Christ followers, if we're not careful, we can begin to move into a place that we don't want to be. What Jesus desires for you and I is freedom and grace, rooted in a desire on our part to simply follow him. What does Jesus want from me? I want to do that. Why? Because I have to? No, because I love him. And I am so grateful for what he's doing in my life. What Jesus did on the cross made a way for every one of us to be freed from sin and made, 2 Corinthians 5:17 said, new creations. That alone is worth a life devoted to him. This is the grace of God that he desires. It's a relationship over religion. But there's one other piece. What if I don't want to? What if I don't want to? What if I wake up on Sunday or Thursday night and I just say, I don't want to go to church? That's interesting. Can I be honest with you? Very rarely, but every once in a while, there'll be a Sunday that as a pastor, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's Thursday night, so I think we have a little freedom. There are some Sundays, and I'm very honest, it is very rare, but it does happen sometimes where I think, oh my goodness, we've got so much going on, and there's some challenges we're going to have to work through this morning, and and I can find myself in a place where I go, I'm not that excited to go to church today. Maybe for you, it's less the business side that it is for me as a pastor. Maybe for you, it's just, man, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I am exhausted. Maybe there's a golf tournament that's not more important, but it just only happens once a year, on Easter. Kind of a problem. Anyways, different story for another month. Maybe I got in a fight with my wife or my kids, and man, all of a sudden I could care less about being in that building. I don't want to do that. There's a tension there, huh? Because I confess to you that it happens to me. Some days, I don't want to read my Bible today. I don't want to have a devotion. I got stuff to do. Does this mean I'm wrong? I'm in sin? Am I a total failure? Am I not a Christ follower? Do I not love him? What do I do with this? There's a military term called commander's intent. It's used amongst military leaders. And the idea of commander's intent is that in a battle or in a mission, there is one goal that the commander, typically the general, puts in place. Example might be, hey, we are going to invade this city and we are going to remove it of all the terrorists. That's the commander's intent. That's the mission of the fight. But along the way, the commander will give multiple assignments to multiple groups of people. He'll say to platoon 1, you're going to clear all the buildings on this side of the road. Platoon 2, you're going to take out all of the arsenal over there to make sure they don't have any weapons to use against us. Group 3, platoon 3, you're going to clear the streets of all people so that we can make our way in. And what happens in war so often is the plan that was made often has to change on the battlefield because they get there and something is different that they couldn't have expected. Maybe the building blew up and they're not able to accomplish the mission they had. Maybe the streets are either already empty or there's something there they didn't anticipate. And instead of calling back in and going, hey, General, sir, we can't do what you asked us to do. Could you help us figure this thing out? Instead, what they're trained to do is, hey, you always remember above everything else the commander's intent. There's one mission here to fulfill, and that is to get into the city and clear out the terrorists. So if you have a plan that has to change the plan on the fly. It's not a problem. You have permission to do that. Do what you need to do, but make sure you stay in line with the commander's intent. For you and I, listen, I want you to hear me. I'm not saying you are free to just do whatever you want. That's not the case. But what we must do as Christ followers is stay in line with our commander's intent. Our commander, Jesus, who says, I don't want you to live a religion-based lifestyle. I want you to be in a deep relationship with me. If there is a Sunday that you don't feel like reading your Bible, do not beat yourself up. That's not the point. That's not the religion. That's the religion that Jesus didn't want. His desire is for you to go, look at me, desire to be with me, move toward me. I will help you with these things. Now, some of you are a little uncomfortable, as you should be. Because what if I have a pattern of this? That's a different conversation. If there's a pattern of, I don't want to go to church and worship God. I don't want to have a devotion and get closer to him as a friend. I don't want to serve. I don't want to do. If there's a pattern, that might deserve investigation on your part to go, what's going on with my relationship with God? But Jesus does not desire for us to live in this, you better do everything I've asked you to do. Instead, he says, my grace extends to you. My love extends to you. And as you follow me, I expect your love to come back to me. Love is the key word. Because what is love? Love is not a feeling. Love is not an emotion. Love is an action, and love is a choice. God, I realize who you are, and I love you, and therefore I won't get it perfectly right, but I want to live my life chasing after you. I want to become more and more like you. When I fall, I'll get back up and we'll keep moving on together because I care. That's the freedom that comes with Christ. Not permission to do whatever we want, but a desire for you and I to be in relationship with him. Tonight as you go, you may say, you know what, I might want to do a self-evaluation of kind of my life, where I'm at. Maybe if you're not a Christ follower, you're thinking about some of these things and kind of processing it. I want to encourage you, if you do a self-evaluation, I don't want you to think about all the things you might be doing wrong, or maybe the things that are wrong that you're not quite doing. Hey, I'm not cussing as much as I used to. I'm not drinking as much, definitely not wine. I'm not sleeping around. I'm not doing all of these things. I'm kind of in a good, don't do that. Instead, if you're going to evaluate your life, ask two questions. How am I doing with the two main commandments Jesus put on me? To love God with all my heart and to love my neighbor as myself. Are you known for being someone that's not perfect, but loves God and has a life that's chasing after him? That's a great goal. Are you known for how you love other people because that love comes from God? That's a great goal. It's not a religion, a bunch of things we have to do right. It's a relationship with God that spurs us to action. It's the same in marriage. Then I'll be done. I go on. I have a whole bunch of examples. I'm going to end with this. For those of you that got married, I'm going to give you some marriage counseling here maybe. When you got married, you stood at the altar and you looked across at your spouse, your soon-to-be spouse, and you made a covenant commitment to them that said, I am yours and you are mine. And after that, the relationship that was started, the commitment that was made, changed things in your life. It changed how you acted. It changed things that you did. Example, right? Listen, I don't love taking out the trash. Not my favorite thing to do. But I love my wife, and I don't want my wife to have to do it any more than she does if I'm not there. My love for her spurs a different behavior. This is what God wants from us. We will never be perfect. His grace covers that. But if we love him, we'll chase after him, and we'll slowly but surely become more and more like him. And if you're not a Christ follower in the room, listen to me. This is the greatest gift, in my opinion, and I'm biased, the greatest gift that any human can experience is to accept the life-changing invitation of Jesus Christ in your life. He will change you. But do not look at this as religion. It's a relationship, and a relationship rooted in love will always lead to better things. That's the freedom of God. I hope that helps you. Let me pray.